I was slapped with a $280 parking citation for spending 14 minutes helping my disabled father into his home. So I bought the HOA's parking lot and brought their nonsense to a halt. Let me walk you through how it all began. My name is Jonas Falk, 38. A dozen years ago, I launched a logistics company and sold it for a healthy 8-figure sum before anyone even recognized my name. Since then, I'd been living a low-key life in Seattle, handling investments, keeping to myself. But when my father Robert suffered a stroke, I returned to Cypress Hollow, the coastal California town where I grew up, to care for him. Cypress Hollow hadn't changed much. Picture-perfect streets, lawns trimmed with military precision, and an HOA that policed trivial matters like they were federal crimes. I'd forgotten how stifling it all was, until that parking ticket snapped it back into focus. The problem kicked off on my third day home. Dad needed assistance getting from the car into his wheelchair, then up the ramp and through the door. It took around 14 minutes total, and because his driveway was too steep for safe access, I parked on the street. When I returned to move the car, I found a ticket stuck on the windshield. Neon pink paper, HOA letterhead, and signed by Karen Madsen, the community board president who'd been ruling this place like a monarch for 15 years. Extended idle parking, $280. Vehicle left unattended for more than 10 minutes. Violation 4.7b under Community Code. I stared at it, stunned. 10 minutes? I was just helping my father inside. The next morning, I drove to the HOA office inside the community center. Karen sat behind a glossy mahogany desk that probably cost more than some cars. She was 63, silver hair in a tight bun, dressed in a navy blazer with flashy gold buttons that practically shouted, "In charge." "Mr. Falk," she said, eyes still on her papers. "I assume this visit is regarding your citation." I was assisting my father. He uses a wheelchair. "That must be challenging," she said flatly. "Still, the community rules apply uniformly. Exceptions for personal matters would be unfair." "Unfair? He's disabled." Karen finally met my gaze, her smile razor-sharp. "If we dismissed penalties for every emotional appeal, we'd have chaos. Rules are in place for a reason. Parking for 14 minutes is hardly chaos. 14 minutes of unapproved parking interrupts flow and creates hazards. Our policies were drafted thoughtfully by the community for the community." My patience was thinning, but I stayed calm. "Fine, I'll pay this one, but I need regular access to help my father." "What's the process?" "You'll need to follow our established parking protocols. Temporary visitor passes are available for visits over 10 minutes. "How do I get one?" "You submit an application 48 hours ahead, listing exact timing and vehicle details. Requests are evaluated case by case." "I need permission just to help my dad?" "You must adhere to the same rules as everyone, Mr. Falk. Our standards don't play favorites." I left feeling like I was back in high school, but this time, the principal wore designer blazers and spoke in legalese. Karen wasn't done. Over the next week, I got 3 more violations. One for the angle of my tires, one for idling too long while loading the wheelchair, and one because I parked 17 inches from the curb, not the mandated 12. Each penalty cost $280. Each bore Karen's name and a smug little note about upholding community values. That's when I realized it wasn't about parking. It was about control, and Karen was misusing her power. Rules were meant to help people, not punish them. I decided it was time Karen Madsen learned who she was up against. I spent several days quietly digging into the HOA's structure and finances. What I uncovered was astonishing. Cypress Hollow's HOA was a fragile setup built on a single critical asset, a multi-use parking lot adjacent to the community center. That lot was everything. It was the only piece of property actually owned by the HOA, and it was the linchpin behind every citation. Through a technicality called a leaseback clause, residents paid for access via their dues. But the HOA claimed the right to penalize parking violations anywhere in the neighborhood, citing that lot as the enforcement basis. A twisted but clever scheme. Karen had engineered a model where fines equaled income, and all it took to enforce it was ownership of that one lot. I sat in the back of the next HOA meeting and watched Karen deliver her usual performance. "As outlined in this month's financial summary," she proclaimed to about 40 attendees, Our wise leadership has kept our reserves healthy while minimizing increases to HOA fees. She left out the fact that nearly a quarter of those reserves came from parking violations. I'm also pleased to share that City Council has approved our expansion proposal for the parking area, Karen said proudly. This will offer new revenue channels and guarantee our community's financial strength for years to come. People applauded, clueless that their beloved leader was padding her power with penalties. After the meeting, I approached a woman near the front who'd been taking notes. She appeared to be in her 60s, well put together, with a reserved demeanor that hinted she knew how to avoid Karen's radar. "Hi," I said. "I'm Jonas Falk. Just moved back, helping out with my father." "Marla Quinn," she replied, offering a handshake. "I remember your family. Your mother was lovely." "Thanks. Actually, I hoped you might explain something about the HOA finances. I've run into a few issues with parking tickets." Her face darkened. "Karen's going after you already? 4 citations in 8 days, all while assisting my disabled father. Checks out. She's been weaponizing parking enforcement for years." "You sound like you know the books well." "I should. I was the treasurer before Karen ousted me 3 years ago. Asking questions about shady budget items made me disruptive to community peace." "What kind of shady items?" Marla looked around, ensuring no one was within earshot. Stuff like HOA money being funneled into personal use, and legal costs that clearly benefit Karen more than the community. Legal costs? She's got a lawyer named Desmond Kay who invoices the HOA for everything, from drafting citation templates to researching how to strengthen Karen's control. His firm billed us $80,000 last year alone. For what services exactly? Excellent question. I asked the same and got pushed out of my position as treasurer for it. Marla agreed to meet with me again the following day to walk me through the HOA's financial framework. What she revealed only confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. Karen had constructed a system that profited from intimidation, using that income to pay for legal backup that helped entrench her authority. But the most revealing discovery was tied to the parking lot. Karen had used it as collateral for several loans meant to fund HOA operations. Those debts were now due, and the HOA didn't have the funds to repay them. "She's been banking on future fine revenue from parking to pay current expenses," Marla told me. "If she loses control of that lot, the entire financial model crumbles." Then she dropped something that made my blood run hot. "There's one more thing you should know about how Karen enforces rules. Her targets aren't random. She keeps a list." "What kind of list?" "A list of people she labels as troublesome. Families with disabled relatives, elderly folks who can't push back, single moms, anyone who dares question her authority. She harasses them until they either surrender completely or leave." Marla retrieved a folder stuffed with records. "I've been documenting everything since she ousted me. Over the past 3 years, Karen's tactics have driven 17 families out of the neighborhood through phony violations and unrelenting pressure." 17 families? Yes, like the Martinez family. Their autistic son needed specialized parking. The elderly Patels couldn't keep their lawn up to her exact standards. And the Johnsons. Karen claimed their teenage daughter's music was a threat to community tranquility. What happened to all of them? They were either fined into financial ruin or badgered until they sold their homes at a loss to get away. Karen calls it upholding community expectations, but it's really just her way of purging anyone who doesn't match her vision of the ideal suburb. I flipped through the records, stunned. This wasn't petty rule enforcement. It was targeted oppression. "The worst part?" Marla continued. "She actually brags about it to her inner circle. Says she's curating community character. She genuinely believes she's doing a public good." That's when I knew how to beat her, on her own turf, and protect the next family from falling into her trap. I set up a limited liability company using my legal team back in Seattle and started investigating the legal ownership of the parking lot. That's when I discovered something surprising. The HOA didn't own the land outright. They leased it from a struggling private real estate company. That company was 6 months late on mortgage payments and staring down foreclosure. They were eager to sell and didn't care who the buyer was as long as they got their money. Through my LLC, I submitted an offer. Cash, no inspection, no strings attached, ready to close in 2 weeks. They accepted within a day. While I waited for the paperwork to finalize, Karen took things to the next level, and it caught me off guard. First, she orchestrated a safety audit of the wheelchair ramp I'd installed for my father. She said she'd received numerous complaints about it not aligning with community codes. Armed with a tape measure and a clipboard, she began logging every supposed infraction. "The incline exceeds the permissible slope," she said, scribbling. "The railings aren't at the correct height, and the surface finish hasn't been approved for neighborhood use." "It's a medical access ramp for a disabled man," I replied. "Medical or not, modifications still need to meet visual and construction guidelines. As it stands, this ramp is both unsafe and unsightly." "Unsafe?" "It was built by a licensed contractor following ADA rules. ADA guidelines don't override neighborhood bylaws. The ramp must either be reconstructed to match our specifications or dismantled altogether. The cost to rebuild it, according to Karen's arbitrary metrics? $8,400. But that was just the start. The following morning, I received another fine, this time for visible outdoor medical gear. The offense? Dad's wheelchair being parked on the front porch. "All mobility aids must be stored indoors when not in use," Karen said when I phoned. "Exposed medical items lower property values and give off a clinical appearance." "You're telling me to hide my father's wheelchair?" "I'm asking you to comply with the same aesthetic regulations as your neighbors. Maybe a shed or enclosed garage solution would work. He needs to reach it easily from the front entrance. That's a personal matter. It doesn't take precedence over visual standards for the neighborhood." The last straw came when she had Dad's handicap placard ruled invalid within the community because it wasn't HOA certified. "State-issued placards don't automatically grant parking rights in private developments," she explained, with no shortage of smugness. "To receive exemptions, residents must go through our internal approval process for disability accommodations." "You're saying he needs permission? He's in a wheelchair." "All disability statuses must be reviewed by our designated medical evaluation committee. That's to avoid exploitation of parking privileges." "And who's on this committee?" "I chair it, alongside Mr. K and Mrs. Henderson from the Architecture Board. We assess all applications for special allowances to ensure they align with community expectations." I had no words. Karen had created a gatekeeping system to determine who qualified as disabled enough to be accommodated in their own homes. 2 weeks later, the parking lot was mine. Karen found out the day after the sale was final, when the property managers delivered a formal termination notice to the HOA, ending their lease. She called a board meeting that very night. I wasn't invited, of course, but in a small town, news spreads fast, and Marla managed to record the entire thing from the hallway. "This is sabotage!" Karen's voice blasted through the flimsy walls. "Someone is actively targeting our community, and we have to find out who it is and crush them." "How could anyone even know about the lease?" asked board member Tom Bradley. "Corporate spying, economic warfare. They've been observing us, analyzing our setup, looking for weak points to exploit." "Who would go that far?" "Developers trying to devalue our properties, politicians who hate our neighborhood standards, radical activists who resent successful communities." Then Desmond K. spoke, his tone measured but equally ominous. "Whoever acquired that lot is clearly financially equipped and legally savvy. This was a strategic move intended to dismantle our authority." "Can we undo the sale?" another board member asked. "I'm exploring multiple legal angles," Kay responded. "Possibilities include inducement fraud, breach of existing contractual agreements, maybe even racketeering if we can tie it to a broader scheme." "And what's that going to cost us?" "The initial filings and discovery process would be around 40 grand. If it goes to court, we could be looking at legal expenses approaching 200,000. "Do we even have that kind of budget?" There was a heavy silence before Karen answered. "We'll make it work. Preserving our authority is essential to this community's future. But if the lot's no longer generating income, where will the money come from?" "Emergency dues. We'll issue a special assessment to each household." "And how much would that be per home?" "Roughly $1,100 to start." Chaos broke out in the room as the board came to terms with the fact that they'd need to tell every homeowner they now owed over $1,000 to fund Karen's legal crusade. Desmond K. wasted no time preparing the challenge. But there was a problem. Everything about the purchase was legitimate, and the new owner hadn't violated a single contract or law. Karen still had no clue who she was up against. I preferred to let her find out the hard way. As the legal owner of the lot, I used my rights to place temporary fencing and barriers at the entrances. I put up clear signage. The property was now under new management, and access was restricted pending safety evaluations. The disruption was instant. Residents who relied on the space for everyday parking were left scrambling. Events were canceled due to lack of parking. The local farmers market had to pack up and relocate. With the community center inaccessible, Karen called a last-minute meeting at someone's house. "This is economic warfare," she declared to the gathered, visibly irritated crowd. "Someone is actively attempting to tear our neighborhood apart. We will not let that happen." But Karen's grip on power was starting to fracture. Residents began murmuring questions about how such a vital asset had slipped through the cracks. A few recalled Marla's earlier concerns about financial misconduct. People were starting to wonder if she'd been right all along. I decided to speed things up. I tipped off a contact at the local paper with details of the HOA's financial dealings. 3 days later, a front-page headline appeared. HOA cashes in, hundreds of thousands from fines, few benefits for residents. The article laid out how Karen's regime had amassed over $200,000 in parking fines across 3 years, most of which had gone to legal bills and admin costs instead of neighborhood improvements. It also exposed that Desmond K.'s firm had collected nearly $250,000 from the HOA in 5 years, largely for work that expanded Karen's influence, not community welfare. The public response was instant and furious. Homeowners who had paid hundreds in penalties thinking the funds supported local projects now learned their money had funded lawyers and bureaucracy. But Karen wasn't backing down. She arranged a special session to confront what she called a wave of slander. She booked a new venue, the lobby of a nearby bank, and showed up ready for battle. "Friends and neighbors," she began, voice steady and commanding like someone who'd never faced real opposition. "Our way of life is under siege by external forces that want to destroy what we've built." Around 60 residents came, more than I'd ever seen at any HOA event. The energy in the room was uneasy but still leaned in Karen's favor. The recent transfer of the parking lot was part of a deliberate attempt to harm property values and destabilize our homeownership model. But we're not helpless. We have legal strategies and we'll pursue them vigorously. "What sort of legal strategies?" a man near the front asked. "Mr. K has found serious procedural issues with the transaction. We're confident we can reclaim the asset." K rose from his seat near the back. He looked younger than expected, early 40s, smooth, confident, the type of lawyer used to steamrolling underprepared opponents. "The purchase appears tainted by deceptive intent," he said, his voice practiced and precise. "There's reason to believe we can challenge the sale based on interference with existing leasing agreements and misleading disclosures." That was my cue. I stood up in the middle of the room. "Sorry to interrupt, but I have a question regarding those claims." Karen looked irritated. "This meeting is reserved for HOA members. Are you a resident of Cypress Hollow?" "I am. Jonas Falk, Ocean View Drive. I'm here assisting my father." Karen's eyes narrowed as the name registered. "Mr. Falk," she said icily, "this meeting is not the place to rehash individual grievances about enforcement. Actually, it is, because I'm the one who bought the parking lot." The room went dead silent. Karen's expression shifted rapidly. Confusion, disbelief, then pure rage. "That's not possible," she said tightly. "The buyer was an LLC." "Falk Properties LLC," I confirmed. "My company." Kay was already rising to his feet, likely running through billable hours in his head. "Mr. Falk, if there was any misrepresentation in the sale process, legal action will follow. I've done everything by the book. I made a legal offer. The seller accepted. Full disclosure, no shady dealings." Karen finally found her voice again, now trembling with anger. "You smug bastard. You think you can destroy everything we've built just because you don't like following parking rules? I believe neighborhoods should support their residents, not be weaponized against them." "You arrogant son of a bitch! You leave for 12 years, come back with your tech millions and think you're above our standards?" Her profanity stunned the room. Several people looked genuinely shaken. It was the first time they'd seen her lose control. "Karen," said Tom Bradley cautiously, "maybe we should take a step back." "Be quiet, Tom. This manipulative bastard has been plotting behind our backs, pretending to be a regular resident while orchestrating a takedown." "I haven't destroyed a thing," I replied. "I legally bought a lot that was up for sale." "You bought our lot. You've stripped away our ability to enforce rules. You're turning this neighborhood into anarchy. I'm putting a stop to your bullying, especially of the elderly and disabled." "Bullying! Bullying!" she shrieked, her face a deep shade of red. "You entitled creep!" "Enforcing community rules isn't bullying. These regulations exist for a reason. Like charging my disabled father $1,100 for visible medical equipment?" Gasps rippled through the room. Many had no idea the penalties had gotten that extreme. "Your father chose to live here," Karen snapped. "If he can't abide by the rules, maybe this isn't the right place for someone in his condition." That was the breaking point. The room exploded. People were shouting, at Karen, at me, at each other. The thin illusion of polite community discourse shattered in seconds. "That's enough!" Karen shouted over the noise. "This meeting is finished! Everyone out!" But the crowd didn't budge. Residents kept hurling questions about the lost parking lot, about legal expenses, about the surprise assessments she planned to hit them with. Nobody was letting her off the hook. As the room slowly emptied, people came up to me one by one, sharing stories of fines and harassment. It was obvious now. Karen had been singling out anyone she saw as weak or uncooperative. "That was enlightening," Marla said beside me as we watched Karen storm off, clutching her stack of papers. "She's rattled," I said. "She just watched the whole foundation of her power fall apart, and she knows it." "What's the next step?" "She panics, and panicked people make reckless moves." Then a woman near the front asked something quietly but pointedly. "Why are you doing all this? Do you want to hurt the community?" "No. I want to stop this neighborhood from being turned into a cash machine for lawsuits and bureaucracy." I pulled out the folder I had prepared. "In the last 3 years, the HOA has issued $247,000 in parking fines. Of that, $89,000 went to legal expenses, $34,000 went to administration, and $56,000 was spent on what the budget calls enforcement infrastructure and tools." A low hum filled the room as residents started calculating. "That leaves just $68,000 in actual improvements over 3 years. That's less than $23,000 annually for 180 homes." Karen's voice cut through, strained with fury. "Those numbers are confidential." "No, they're not. HOA law requires financial transparency to members upon request. I asked. They provided." I kept going. "On top of that, the HOA president draws a $45,000 salary plus around $12,000 a year in reimbursed expenses." Now the murmurs turned into vocal outrage. People were no longer on Karen's side. "Mr. Falk," Kay interjected, "you're cherry-picking data without proper context. Managing an HOA requires professional skill and professionalism in writing parking tickets, because that's where most of your revenue stems from." I held up another sheet. "In just 2 weeks, I was fined 4 times for assisting my disabled dad. At $280 each, that's $1,120, more than some of you pay in annual dues." Now people were visibly angry. They were connecting dots they'd never been allowed to see before. "So," I concluded, "does this community want an HOA that serves its residents? Or one that expects residents to serve it?" Karen cut in sharply. "Mr. Falk, you've said enough. Undermining community assets isn't how issues should be resolved. If you had concerns, you could have followed the correct channels." "I did. You told me to apply for a visitor permit 2 days in advance just to help my own father." That sparked another eruption of conversation. Residents began openly trading stories of petty fines and arbitrary enforcement. Karen could feel the ground slipping from beneath her. "This meeting is over," she said coldly, grabbing her documents. "Further discussion will be through legal representation." But the crowd ignored her. They kept talking, asking questions she'd spent years discouraging. For the first time, her control was visibly cracking. As the crowd dispersed, Marla walked over with a small, victorious smile. "Well done," she said. "Think it'll change anything?" It's a start, but she's not going down without a fight. No, she's got too much to lose. And Marla was right. The very next morning, I received a certified envelope from Desmond Kay's law firm, and it was unlike anything I'd ever received from a lawyer. It accused me of economic sabotage, targeted destabilization, abuse of senior residents, apparently buying a parking lot qualified, and conspiring to erode residential harmony. It demanded that I immediately cease all hostile acts against the HOA and restore access to the parking facility, or else face full legal penalties for your misconduct. It also claimed I had caused Karen extreme emotional damage and public humiliation by legally purchasing the lot. But the strangest part? At the bottom of the letter, in unmistakably Karen's handwriting, was a scrawl that read, "You messed with the wrong neighborhood, asshole." A lawyer had let his client write profanity on formal legal stationery. Either Kay was clueless, or Karen was completely off the rails. I sent the letter to my attorney in Seattle. He called back an hour later, laughing. "This is the most unprofessional document I've seen in years," he said. "The language alone could get this guy disbarred, and your neighbor left a handwritten threat on official letterhead? Is it a serious legal threat? It's intimidation dressed up as law. You've done nothing wrong. They're trying to scare you into settling." "Well, let them try. I want this in court." "You sure? Trials aren't cheap." "I can handle the costs. The real question is, can they?" But Karen's panic pushed her to do something even worse. She began punishing other residents she thought were on my side. The Hendersons, an elderly couple who'd simply talked to me after the meeting, received a $500 fine for misaligned mailbox placement. Their mailbox hadn't moved in 8 years. Mrs. Chen, who nodded when I spoke, was hit with a citation for over-decorated entryways. She had 3 flower pots, not the allowed 2. The Williams family? Their teenage son once helped carry my dad's wheelchair. They got a $300 fine for unpermitted yard ornamentation. Their gnome was an inch too tall. But the worst retaliation was reserved for the Rodriguezes. Maria Rodriguez, a single mother juggling 2 jobs while caring for her daughter Sophia, who has cerebral palsy, was hit with 4 violations in 3 days. $400 for visible medical devices. Sophia's walker could be seen from the sidewalk. $350 for improper vehicle condition. Maria's 10-year-old Honda had a bit of visible rust that supposedly breached the HOA's appearance standards. $275 for violating quiet hours. Sophia's physical therapy sessions were allegedly too noisy. $450 for unauthorized structural additions. They had installed a safety handrail beside their front steps. That brought the total to $1,475 in penalties, levied against a disabled child and her exhausted, hard-working mother. When Maria called me in tears, asking if I knew any lawyers who might help her fight back, I realized Karen had just given me the perfect ammunition to take her down, permanently. By the following week, I had filed a civil suit, and right alongside it, a counterclaim of my own: harassment, defamation, and illegal interference with my property rights. I also lodged an official complaint with the city's zoning department regarding potential code violations in how the HOA operated the community center. That's when Priya Song entered the scene. Priya was a zoning officer with the city, mid-30s, buried in paperwork, but known for her honesty and diligence. She'd been quietly looking into the HOA's conduct for some time. "Mr. Falk," she said when she phoned, "I understand you filed a complaint about the community center's zoning compliance?" "That's right. I'm concerned the building's usage doesn't match what it was approved for." "I have the same concern. Would you be willing to meet and discuss what you've seen?" We met up in a quiet coffee shop a few towns away, somewhere Karen's eyes and ears wouldn't reach. "I've been following the HOA's operations for months," Priya said. "There are serious inconsistencies in their permit applications. It looks like they've been using the building in ways the original zoning never allowed." "What sort of use?" "Commercial activities. The center was green-lit as a public gathering space, but they've been renting it for private parties, corporate functions, even weddings. That requires a different classification and different approvals." "You have evidence?" "I've got rental agreements and payment records dating back 2 years, but I need witness testimony to make the case legally viable." What kind of testimony are we talking about? Someone who can confirm the business use of the facility and speak to the revenue it generated. Someone who has standing to challenge the HOA. I saw where this was going. Like the current owner of the parking lot that gives access to those events. Exactly. Her investigation had uncovered that Karen had been running a shadow business out of the community center for years, completely unlicensed. Wedding receptions, company retreats, private celebrations, all without the proper zoning or tax reporting. Almost $40,000 in annual income from those rentals was being hidden in the HOA's books under vague terms like facility maintenance fees. But what Priya found buried in the contracts was even worse. Karen had been charging premium rates for events, advertising exclusive access to a refined community with strict demographic safeguards. The flyers were appalling. Cypress Hollow was marketed as a premium neighborhood that upholds traditional family values and resident quality. And when potential renters asked what that meant, Karen answered in writing, "We maintain elevated demographic and lifestyle standards. Our HOA policies guarantee neighbor compatibility." This is textbook housing discrimination, Priya told me. She's been driving families out who don't align with her vision and using that as a selling point to make money off the community center. You have solid proof? I have rental contracts promising demographic stability and carefully curated composition. I also have testimonies from families who were relentlessly fined and harassed before eventually moving out. What happens when you file your report? The city will shut down all commercial activity immediately, and they'll also investigate whether the HOA owes back taxes on all that undeclared income. Plus, the discrimination alone could trigger a federal civil rights case. But Priya had saved the most explosive discovery for last. Jonas, there's more. Karen hasn't just been enforcing randomly, she's been monitoring what she calls demographic drift and using HOA rules to reverse it. She slid a folder across the table labeled Confidential Community Composition Analysis. She's been collecting data on every resident, tracking things like ethnicity, income, family size, marital status, and what she refers to as lifestyle traits. Anyone who didn't fit her mold was gradually fined or harassed until they gave up and left. I opened the folder and couldn't believe what I saw. Karen had categorized residents into groups like traditional families, hetero-married couples with kids, acceptable singles, young, employed professionals, and problematic residents, single parents, seniors with accessibility needs, households with disabled members, or anyone who ever questioned her decisions. She's not just being discriminatory, Priya added. She's engineering the neighborhood's demographics through targeted enforcement. This is criminal. On several levels, housing discrimination, violations of civil rights law, and if her business rentals are tied to this, potential racketeering. And that's exactly how it unraveled. 3 days after Priya submitted her report, the city slapped a red notice on the community center declaring it unsafe for gatherings until code violations were corrected. But the real nuclear moment came when the FBI's Civil Rights Division publicly announced an investigation into systemic housing discrimination and conspiracy to violate federal fair housing protections. The basis? The community composition analysis files and Karen's own signed rental contracts promising demographic control. Karen was now looking at federal criminal charges, with a potential 10-year sentence on the table. The violations were extensive. The building had been renovated to support larger crowds without permits. Electrical systems were overloaded. Emergency exits didn't meet code for the volume of guests Karen had been advertising. The estimated cost to fix the building? $120,000. The HOA didn't have that kind of money, especially not with the parking lot, their only source of enforcement leverage, now out of their hands. Karen scrambled and called yet another emergency session, this time held in a cramped corner of a real estate office, attended only by her dwindling supporters. "This is a plotted assault on our neighborhood," she declared. "The city is overreacting to minor issues. This is all being pushed by external troublemakers who want us to fail." "Are the violations real?" one man asked. "They're minor technicalities that have been overlooked for years. Now the city's cracking down because of pressure from agitators." "You mean like the man who bought our parking lot?" Karen's jaw clenched. Mr. Falk has made his intentions very clear. He's determined to destroy everything we've created here. He's throwing money around to punish this community just because he refuses to abide by the same standards as everyone else. But then Tom Bradley, the same board member who'd questioned the legal spending, stood up, holding a thick folder. "Karen," he said, "I've done some digging of my own, and what I found is deeply troubling." "What exactly did you find?" "These contracts you've signed for renting out the community center. Some of the language is disturbing." He opened the folder and began reading. "This exclusive venue upholds strict neighborhood standards to preserve suitable resident demographics and support traditional family values." A hush fell across the room. "What does that even mean?" asked Mrs. Patterson. Karen's cheeks turned red. "It means we ensure a high level of appearance and conduct within the community. That's why people pay extra to use our space." "But what about this?" Tom continued. "Our management ensures demographic consistency through curated enforcement of residential rules." "You're twisting the words." He read another line aloud. "Our community board has maintained a 93% traditional family makeup through proactive oversight of neighborhood development." The crowd grew restless and the silence turned into murmuring. "Karen," said Mrs. Chen cautiously, "are you implying that certain families were being singled out?" "I've been upholding standards that safeguard our home values. By forcing out families with disabled children?" Tom countered. "Because I also uncovered your community composition analysis files. Those are internal administrative documents. They're discrimination logs," Tom shot back. "You've been cataloging people based on race, household type, and disabilities." Outrage broke out. Former loyalists were now seeing Karen through a completely different lens. "You've been running a biased enforcement scheme," shouted Mr. Williams. "That explains why the Martinez family disappeared." "And the Hendersons," added Mrs. Patterson. "You chased them out of the neighborhood." "I've been defending this community from decline," Karen shouted, voice cracking. "If we let just anyone move in, this place will lose all value. We'll end up like every other failing suburb." "Just anyone? You mean disabled kids and single parents?" "I mean people who undermine neighborhood harmony." The room erupted. What had looked like rule enforcement was now revealed as institutional discrimination cloaked in community policy. And yet, Karen still wasn't finished. Driven by fear, she made one final, fatal mistake. "Maybe the rules themselves need to be reviewed," someone suggested. "If they're causing this kind of harm, they shouldn't stay untouched." "The rules are the only thing keeping this place livable," Karen snapped. "Without structure, everything will fall apart." But the tide was turning. Residents were beginning to question everything: budget transparency, legal spending, secret rentals. Confidence in Karen was crumbling. The death blow came when Marla Quinn rose from her seat, holding her own binder. "I've compiled a full financial audit of the HOA's past 5 years," she said. "It documents widespread mismanagement and quite possibly fraud." Karen tried to shut it down. "Mrs. Quinn has no accounting license. This so-called audit is meaningless." "Actually, I am a licensed CPA," Marla replied, her voice calm. "I retired after 30 years in corporate finance, and what I found is damning. 34% of the HOA's revenue over the last 5 years came from parking citations and maintenance fines." She began reading aloud. "On average, households were fined $340 per year. Some families paid over $1,200 annually for things like crooked trash bins or too many garden decorations." Karen cut in defensively. "That money went toward community improvements." "No," Marla countered. 72% of that revenue was spent on administrative overhead, legal contracts, and enforcement tools. Less than 15% went toward actual improvements." The room fell quiet again, this time out of stunned realization. "And," Marla continued, "the HOA president's salary and reimbursements consumed nearly 1/5 of the total budget, not including legal costs that mostly served her own power structure." Karen's face burned with rage. This is slander based on cherry-picked data and old grudges. "It's a financial report compiled from documents that should have been disclosed years ago," Marla answered plainly. That meeting ended with an overwhelming call for a leadership change. A special election was held 2 weeks later. Karen was removed, 127 votes to 23. The FBI and district attorney moved swiftly. Federal agents raided Karen's home, seizing the community composition analysis files and the discriminatory contracts she'd personally signed. The investigation confirmed multiple civil rights violations and fraudulent financial practices. Karen had targeted homeowners based on race, disability, and family structure, all under the guise of community enforcement. The evidence was overwhelming. Her files detailed discriminatory methods and strategies to encourage voluntary departure of undesirable residents. It was also revealed that Karen had been misusing HOA reimbursements to cover her personal bills, mortgage, auto loans, credit card, debt, and even tuition payments for her daughter. When the payments stopped, everything unraveled. Her house was repossessed, her vehicle was towed, and her credit accounts were frozen. Meanwhile, I held a public parking space auction. The funds went toward a legal support fund for victims of Karen's abuse. In the first month alone, the auction raised $67,000. The Rodriguez family was fully reimbursed for the $1,475 in unfair fines and received additional aid for medical expenses. Elderly residents were refunded and received legal support to clear their records. I sent a letter to every household in Cypress Hollow. The HOA charged me $1,120 for parking outside my father's home while helping him into his wheelchair. So I bought their parking lot and dismantled their system of abuse. I saw Karen one last time. She was packing boxes into a rented truck outside a rundown duplex. Her back was hunched, her expression blank, stripped of every ounce of authority she once wielded.